Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're looking at Waking a Giant, and we are going to unpack the monumental, high stakes challenge of starting a jet class gas turbine from a dead cold stop. We're talking about a machine capable of generating tens of thousands of horsepower. But before it can produce even a fraction of that energy, it faces a massive physical hurdle. Here's the thing, this engine absolutely cannot start itself, not even a little bit. You might think firing up industrial power of this magnitude is as simple as clicking a mouse in a control room, but that couldn't be further from the truth. We actually need a massive amount of external force just to physically spin thousands of pounds of cold, resting metal up to speed first. And the stakes here? They're literally catastrophic if you mess up. A jet-class compressor needs external torque to establish enough airflow before you can even think about introducing fuel. If you get this start sequence wrong, say you try to force it or ignore the physics, you won't just politely stall out. No, you will shear a gearbox spline in under a second. We're talking instant, incredibly expensive destruction. So, let's follow the flow of power and see how the system safely wakes up the gas generator core. It's really an elegant chain reaction. First, you've got an electric motor driving a hydraulic pump. That pump shoots high-pressure fluid directly at a starter motor. Then, that starter cranks a gas generator shaft through a very specific piece of hardware called a one-way clutch. Just to give you an idea of the sheer force we're talking about, starting this engine is honestly closer to hand-cranking an old-school tractor than starting your modern car. Except the crank in this scenario is a massive 150-kilowatt hydraulic system. It is just blasting fluid to do all the heavy lifting against the inertia of that resting metal. Now, what's genuinely brilliant about this setup is that one-way clutch I just mentioned. It's a mechanical connection that pushes the rotor forward with all that hydraulic muscle. But, and this is absolutely key, it can never, ever be pushed back by the rotor once the engine gets going. And here's why that specific design is a total lifesaver. Once the engine actually achieves self-sustaining combustion, which happens at roughly 4,500 RPM, it starts accelerating incredibly fast on its own. Because of that one-way connection, the clutch safely auto-disengages right at that 4,500 RPM mark. If it were a fixed connection, the turbine would drag the starter motor along and absolutely tear it to shreds. So that brings us to an absolute non-negotiable law of turbine operation, the rotor speed rule. You must never engage the starter unless the shaft is completely at rest or just windmilling slowly below roughly 300 RPM. Windmilling just means passive air drafts are turning it. But if it's spinning any faster than that, you wait. Because if you ignore that rule, let's just say trying to engage the hydraulic starter while the rotor is already spinning above 300 RPM is one of the absolute most expensive rookie mistakes you can make in this entire trade. The mismatch in speed instantly shatters the starter and shreds those gearbox splines. You go from a routine startup to a multi-million-dollar repair in a fraction of a second. But assuming you follow the rules safely, the giant hydraulic starter will crank the gas generator up to roughly 2,200 to 2,300 RPM. And remember, at this point, we are spinning incredibly fast, but there is zero fuel in the mix yet. We're simply using hydraulic muscle to pack in the air and create the perfect environment for combustion. Once we hit that perfect airflow, the fuel valves finally open, the igniters spark, and the clock immediately starts ticking. On gas fuel, ignition, or light-off, has to happen within about 10 seconds. So you have to ask yourself, what happens if the igniters are firing, the fuel is pouring in, but the engine just doesn't light within that tiny window? Well, the control system doesn't just cross its fingers and hope the next spark catches. It instantly triggers an auto abort. It completely and safely cuts the fuel supply, immediately taking the decision out of the operator's hands. This is a super important paradigm shift to keep in mind. A failed light-off isn't a glitch, and it is definitely not a try-again situation. It's a highly controlled abort. It is intentionally triggered to prevent unburned fuel from continuously pumping into a hot, pressurized combustor. If the system didn't abort, that pooling fuel would basically turn into a massive bomb inside the engine. The safety system is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Okay, let's quickly summarize what we've covered to bring this giant to life. You now know that the core needs external torque to get the air flowing. You've seen how the 150-kilowatt hydraulic system cranks the core, and how that brilliant clutch auto-releases at 4,500 RPM. You know the golden rule, never engage above 300 RPM. And you understand the strict 10-second ignition window and why an auto abort is absolutely critical to prevent fuel pooling. But waking the giant is really just step one, because at the end of the day, spinning air alone makes zero power. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought to ponder for our next explainer. Once the machine is spinning safely, how exactly do we manage the highly volatile, complex dual fuel systems to turn that spin into real, roaring combustion without accidentally baking a delicate fuel nozzle shut forever? We are going to tackle that exact puzzle next time. Keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.